I want you to think about the last time you watched a spinal energetic session or some kind of somatic session where you watched people move, or maybe you received a section and you were like, this is weird. They're spontaneously moving without being told what to do, without any conscious decision to do anything. And if you ask them, they'll tell you this. Like their spine is just beginning to undulate like water and their arms are rising without instruction. Their jaw is releasing or they're making sounds that they've never made before. And it seems to come from somewhere that's older than language. It feels really primitive. And maybe there's a part of you that thought, what is happening? What is that? Is this real? Is it safe? Is it an exorcism? Is that for me? Or is that if you're in the session, you're like, is this me or something else? What is going on? And here's what I can tell you is that your nervous system is completing something it was never allowed to complete, right? I always talk about it like a loop. And this is your fascia, your body's liquid crystal bioelectric communication network. It's releasing patterns that have been stored since the last time you were not safe enough to move through them. Our body's innate wisdom is to move in a response to something. Even if it's a freeze response or something like that, it's to mobilize something we need to when we feel angry or we want to shake. If you ever watch kids process emotions, movement is always a part of it. And so when you're moving through something, instead of it getting stuck in your body, typically there's a lot of a surge or an urge to move. And that's really a vagal nerve communication. That's your spinal cord. The movement that you're seeing, that's your vagus nerve. That's your spinal cord. That's your autonomic nervous system doing what it's always known how to do. You just needed the conditions to allow it to happen. And the science, we're going to talk about peer-reviewed, published, neuroscience-backed, quantum biology explained. This is exactly why we're here, right? We're looking at diving deeper into the science and kind of this space where it's not being taught in schools yet, but it's already known to be true science of what's going on with health, what's going on with the body, how are we changing and evolving as a species, as communities. That's what this episode is all about today. I'm Dr. Shalane Carter. This is Be the Frequency, and today we're going to talk about why your spine is a quantum antenna. So I want to talk a lot about what's actually going on with your biology and why and what happens in spinal energetic sessions is not really mysterious, to be honest. It actually, when the first time I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, this makes sense to me. And I'll tell you a little bit why that is. But part of that is understanding that movement, again, is one of the most intelligent things that the body does. And the science has been emerging in this space of fascia, and this fascia is also called like your interstitium. And this science has been emerging for the last like 30 years, really, in neuroscience, somatic trauma research, quantum biology. They've been quietly kind of building this case for these modalities, whether it was intended to or not. And I think that's kind of what happens when we talk about collective shifts and collective changes that we're seeing. It's not just more people are going to therapy. More people are realizing that what they're experiencing in their mind, the thoughts that they're having, is affecting their body. And in order to make a change, it has to include your body. Today's episode has a very specific purpose, and I really want to name it clearly because it's for every practitioner who has ever sat across from that skeptical client. So maybe you're not the practitioner, but maybe you're the skeptical person. I always kind of joke, by the time people come to me, they've seen every ologist, they've tried talk therapy, they've done other things. I am not the first person that they call. Usually people have gone to a traditional, somebody to do traditional Reiki. They've gone to somebody to do talk therapy. They maybe done some EMDR. Usually by the time they're seeing me for more of the understanding of the somatics, and we're diving deeper into a lot of the layers of your health, they've already explored other stuff. Okay. So it's interesting. I feel like I get two kind of sides to this. I do a lot of education, and I do a lot I do a lot of education around what this is, and I really try and collect the science behind it, because I think the science that is going on, the research that is happening, helps people understand. And so if you're sitting across from a skeptical client and you're searching for language to actually explain what spinal energetics is or what somatic therapies are, or again, maybe some other alternative therapies, and you're trying to explain why this works, anybody who does any type of nervous system work or is having it done or is a practitioner is really going to love this episode. And this is for every client who's received a session and felt something profound, but they don't have the language, which is really common. I get that verbiage a lot. They're like, I felt a lot, but I can't really tell you. Yes, because you also didn't have the words at the time. You didn't know what to do with what you were experiencing in your system, right? It works as a whole. And so it didn't know what to do. It didn't feel safe to explore moving through it. So it held it. So it's undeniably real for them. And if you've ever had a session, then they're like, I get this all the time. How do I explain to somebody about what you do? Like, how do I explain you? I like grappled with like trying to condense some of my work into a few words. And I think a lot of people do that when, there's not just a blanket statement for what they do. I think, it's like levels of appropriateness, right? If somebody's like, what do you do? A lot of times I just say, I'm a doctor of natural medicine. But if it's just kind of in passing, but if we really want to get deeper, I'm like, oh, I actually dive into like a lot of the quantum biology and a lot of more of the ancient medicine practices, understanding how to connect back with nature because your body recognizes nature. Like I get into like some more of those things. So this is really for so many people. It's for, the practitioner who's talking to the skeptic. It's the person who's had some type of experience in some session that is like this, whether it's spinal energetics or something else, and they can't really explain it to other people. This is for the healer who knows in their bones, in their nervous system, that this work is doing something. Nothing else that they have tried comes close to, but they want more of the science behind it. So if you're trying to, or you're being approached by people who like need a little bit more of that understanding, or they want more quote unquote proof, like, if you're feeling a change, that is the science for you. And again, there's a reason why placebo is always included in research trials and things like this, because it's comparing what the mind alone can do in comparison to some other stimulus. So I want to be clear on what it is. And I also want to be clear on what it's not. This is not a reduction of spinal energetics to just components or mechanisms, because I think we're going to primarily talk about spinal energetics, but you can, there's spinal flow, spinal network. There's a lot of different other somatic therapies out there. But when you try to explain to somebody, it's like trying to explain to somebody, I use this reference. If you're a parent, if you don't have kids, you'll think you know, but you don't. It is like trying to explain to somebody who is freshly pregnant. They're new. They just found out they're pregnant. And they're asking you what it's like to have kids. And you're trying to explain that to them. But they have no reference because they never actually had kids before. They may have been an oldest sibling. That was me. Is raising my own kids the same? No. I was the oldest sibling. I took care of a lot of kids. I babysat a lot. I had a lot of experience. I worked with kids all growing up. Thought I was maybe going to do something with kids at some point, as far as like in education or something like that. Really, to this day, still really love kids. But for somebody who has never had their own children, you try and describe the birth experience to them. One, everybody's birth is different. Two, explaining to them what being a parent is like when they actually have no reference for it does not actually help. You do not understand what that is like until you have experienced it. I think about that in love too. To tell somebody what it feels like to love so deeply that you would give your life for them is hard to describe to somebody who's never been in that depth of love. Okay, and so this modality, even Dr. Sarah Jane Perry, who's the founder of Spinal Energetics, she says this herself, like, it's easy to experience, difficult to explain. And that difficulty is not because it doesn't have a lot of integrity, a lot of foundations in the nervous system science and things like that. But it's because what happens often in a session doesn't really touch the dimensions of our human experience in language or explanatory like frameworks that we currently have. There's nothing right now that I have found that can describe it wholly. But science is coming closer than we realize, which is why I wanted to do this episode. And today we're going to get as close as we can in human language, in the English language of quantum biology, and see where neuroscience will take us. Okay, so we're going to build it a little bit. I do find interestingly, when you look at, so a lot of practices in TCM or traditional Chinese medicine, different caricatures in Chinese don't have direct to English translation. And they have, it's more of a saying, and they use a lot of like descriptive or metaphoric type language. And I was talking about this with my acupuncturist, and when she was talking about all of the different pulses, and she was like, "Oh, this is the divorce pulse." And I was like, "The divorce pulse?" We were kind of talking, but she was taking my pulse. And I was like, "Oh, that's so interesting. I didn't know about this." And she's like, "Yeah, I think there's 27 different pulses." And she's like, "But we were kind of talking about how it doesn't translate exactly to divorce, or it doesn't translate exactly to these words. It's like water running over pebbles or marbles or something." It's very descriptive and metaphoric. And I think that almost that type of language might actually be more helpful. And I use a ton of metaphors in my practice. So if you're a practitioner, I highly recommend starting to lean into other ways to describe to people what they might be experiencing, because I think it helps my clients really understand what the experience might be like or how to relate it to other people if they're trying to share it. Okay. But I really want to talk about first Dr. Sarah Jane. So she is a chiropractor and kind of a holistic based counselor out of Australia. And she developed spinal energetics after years of practicing more the conventional chiropractic approach. But she was noticing that something was kind of missing. The structure of the work was so precise, the adjustments, were accurate. But it's like a significant number of her clients were returning not just because their spine was out of alignment due to like a mechanical issue, but something deeper was starting to change. And the structure was recreating the patterns over and over again. The nervous system was remembering patterns of tension. So this is, the emotional body, the energetic field, that these layers of stored experience with that no spinal adjustment, however masterful, was really addressing. That there was this huge gap. So that's kind of where spinal energetics is starting to emerge. It's like understanding and taking into account, again, what a lot of these ancient medicine practices like TCM and Ayurveda always took into account was the energetic body, the layers of the body outside of the physical form, and the spirit as well, or consciousness. So it draws, actually, most somatic therapies draw from a wide influence of resources, but spinal energetics in particular is a influence of chiropractic and like osteopathic understanding of the spine. It's the neuroscience of like trauma and nervous system regulation. But you also have some again, more of those Eastern influences, yogic models of the subtle body, its energy channels, cranial sacral therapy, somatic psychotherapy, again, TCM, pranayama, all of these contributors. It's not, okay, we're just going to combine all of these things. It's that there's this distinct like synthesis that starts to happen, this new thing that emerges from kind of the intersection of all of them. And something that I think all people should watch. I wish I could remember who gave the talk, but it was a TED talk that I was shown when I went through my first yoga teacher training. And it was talking about, we were using it in reference to learn that when you're creating yoga sequences, like everything is a remix. Everything is that you're building is based on somebody else's. It might be similar to somebody else's, but it's with your unique flair, how you teach, your cadence, your rhythm, your music, whatever it is, that really starts to make it your own. And he broke down the evolution of the development of certain like inventions and things like that, and how we are inspired by one another. And nobody really has any new ideas. They have ideas that other people have talked about, or they see other things, and they take this compilation from many different avenues and they make it something new. So it might be adjacent to something or similar to something, but it's not the same. And I think that's really important to understand, is that spinal energetics is held together by one central understanding that the body is not solely physical. It's influenced by emotional, psychological, ancestral, or energetic experiences. And that's not really new either. But in reference to how it's utilized, I think it is different. And those influences are stored in the body's tissues, in the spine, in the fascia, in the nervous system, and they can be addressed directly. So again, I think it's looking at where modern medicine has taken the mind and put it over here in talk therapy and psychiatric or psychological help. And we need to address the mind over here, and that doesn't influence the physical body. And they're still very, very separate in the Western model. And I think what a lot of these somatic therapies are addressing is that intersection. And what, again, ancient medicine has always known is you can't separate the body, mind, or the spirit from one another. They work synergistically. And that's really why I was drawn to spinal energetics, is I saw a lot of these influences. What was fascinating is, so you have to do an application video. They don't just approve anybody to go through the training. So, which I really loved, that you were like vetted and all these things. And I was like, hey, it kind of looks to me a bit like, again, traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, chiropractic work, not knowing really any history about it. I literally saw it and I was like, I love this. This to me makes sense. Like, those things that you're just like, yes. And it's different for everybody. But this is how it was for me. I felt this way also about reading certain books. They just felt true right away. So, apply or whatever. Day one of the training, I think like opening video, she says something to the effect of, this is a blend of chiropractic work influenced by traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurveda. I was like, damn, okay. I was like, yes, this is where that body, mind, spirit starts to integrate. So in a session, the practitioner really does work with light touch. So it's not chiropractic and like adjustment. Sometimes there's no touch. So but you are moving along the spine, but you're also working in the field, and you're making precise contact at specific points that act as these like keys to the nervous system's own healing intelligence, and the body responds accordingly. It's really, I almost say it's like you're helping the body remember what it already knows how to do. And just like if you haven't ridden a bike for 10 years, you might need to you're like, okay, I'm kind of figuring out the pedals, the gears, the brakes, and every bike is a little different. But for the most part, the structure is the same. And so sometimes if you haven't had that mind-body connection in a long time, sometimes it helps to have somebody be like, the gears are on the right, the brake is on the left, squeeze the brake. There's brakes for the back tire and the front tire. If you squeeze this, and just give you a little reminder, and you're like, oh yeah, or you kind of figure it out a little. That's to me what it's like as the practitioner of any type of somatic therapy, is you are helping guide them back to an awareness of their body. You are not doing anything to them. You are helping their body remember. So sometimes people's bodies remember very quickly, and sometimes immediately, but sometimes after several sessions. I have a couple of clients right now that we worked together for long periods of time, 12 plus sessions. And it wasn't until they were at like session 9, 10, they started to move at all. They just thought they weren't movers, which is common, but all of a sudden they're starting to move. So sometimes it can look really dramatic, this like spontaneous spinal undulation, arms moving, again, yoga-like postures literally on the table. Sometimes it looks like trembling, shaking, sounds, crying, laughing, screaming, like all the things. And sometimes they're in ways that are invisible and they're internal. And this is what I'm looking for a lot of times as a practitioner. The quality of breath changes. They release tension that had been very visible, and all of a sudden their body drops it. You can see the musculature parts of the body that have been holding the tension, right? The physical body. It starts to just slowly let it go. It's a sense of being more present in their body than they have for years, right? And here's something I really want to clarify for anyone who's new to this work, or the amount of, and I think it's important because the amount of visible movement in a session does not actually equal any depth of what's happening. So some people are just, again, a lot more visible, a lot more external in their expression. And sometimes the next session, they don't move at all. And some people never move, but have this extremely internal shift. The work is always happening at the level at which the nervous system feels safe, at which is appropriate for them. So again, it's not that one, just because one's more visible than the other, that it's more profound. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit too about some of the science behind this. As I mentioned in the beginning, that the spine is more like a quantum antenna. And this is part of the reason why. So let's start with there. I want to start with something that seems and sounds pretty extraordinary. And I think it is, and in fact, it's pretty straightforwardly confirmed by science, is that collagen is piezoelectric. Means, again, it carrying a current, or it can produce a current. So collagen is the primary structure of protein in your spine, your fascia, your tendons, your ligaments, your connective tissues, basically throughout the entire body. And collagen is the most abundant protein in the human body. And it is piezoelectric, meaning that when it is mechanically stressed, okay? So again, when it's compressed, when there's slight movement or stretch or anything like that, it generates a measurable electrical charge. I say this because I need you to understand that the collagen in your body generating this electrical charge, this is not a metaphor. This is documented physics, okay? And this has been confirmed across decades of research. And it's really now being applied to that tissue engineering and even wound healing applications. People have been burned, things like that. So this is why I think this is pretty extraordinary, is that every movement of your body, every breath, every heartbeat, every footfall, every mild adjustment that you make, every hand gesture generates bioelectric signals through the collagen network, okay? So your fascia is not just this passive, kind of packing material of the body. It's more of this living bioelectric generator that's transmuting information throughout the body via electric signals that's produced by this mechanical input. Okay. Now here's where we want to bring the spine in. Okay. So your spine is the central axis for this collagen network. So this is the structure that your entire fascial system is actually organized around. So it's the primary conductor and organizer of this bioelectric information. Okay. So your spine, because this is the central hub, is literally a piezoelectric antenna. Okay. This antenna that is generating a charge all the time, right? Broadcasting a frequency, so to speak. Okay, so now let's talk about the fascia layer. Okay, so we talked about collagen, but let's talk about the fascia, because I think this is where it gets even cooler, or again, the more that we understand about our body, the more that we can connect with who we are. I think the more that we can make changes, the healthier and happier that we can live. So let's understand about fascia. So fascia is this continuous sheet of connective tissue that surrounds every muscle, every organ, nerve, bone in your body, and was pretty much until recently dismissed by conventional medicine as again, kind of this packing or insulation type stuff. So not fat, but we just got to keep it all together in this meat suit. This structure, though, the structure you cut through to get to the interesting stuff, okay, right? It just didn't really. So we know that now, again, hindsight's always 2020, but this is probably one of the most costly mistakes in all of human history studying anatomy, really. Because recent research has actually classified fascia as a 4-organ system, okay? It is not peripheral. It is a continuous body-wide network interlinked with fluid-filled interstitial superhighway. So it is constantly communicating. So essentially, extension of the nervous system. So this discovery kind of reorganized our understanding actually of what the body's internal fluid dynamics pretty much entirely. And it was published in 2018. So again, not that long ago, 8 years ago. The fascia's, though, primary structural protein that it uses is collagen. Piezoelectric collagen. So again, the nervous system is an electrical system. Collagen, which is made up, which the spine is the primary or like central hub for all of this collagen, right? There's collagen other places, obviously, but you find a ton there. That now we're understanding that the fascia also, their primary building block is also collagen, that protein. So that means the entire fascial network is a body-wide bioelectric communication system. Okay. So it's starting to transmit signals generated by mechanical input through this continuous matrix of the body. And it reaches literally every single structure in your body. No cell is more than a few diameters from a fascial element. So nothing really is outside this network. Again, when we think about the nerves, they start with your nervous system that includes your brain and your spine, and then it goes to your peripheral, right? It extends through this network. This is almost like the smaller, further away, okay? So fascia researchers describe this connective tissue using analogies that are often drawn more directly from like electronics, okay? It's like it has semiconductor properties, electrical signal transmission, okay? If you're not super into like electrical stuff, right over your head, which is totally fine. But just understanding that it's really this body-wide bioelectric communication system, right? This electrical system, body, and the speed and precision at which this chemical signaling, you can't account for how fast this goes. Chemical signaling is actually slower, okay? So let's take it one step further. There's the cerebral spinal fluid piece, which connects the spine specifically to biophotons, which are I talked about biophotons and the research behind that, I think 2 weeks ago. So if you want to go listen to that episode, you can go listen to that. Or maybe it was last week. Anyways, the past few episodes, we talked about kind of quantum biology. And if you want to learn more about that specifically, go check that out. How, again, literally a light being, biophotons. Okay. Research has found that, so we're talking about the cerebral spinal fluid, okay? So research has found that the fluid surrounding the brain and the spinal cord, okay, the cerebral spinal fluid, interacts with the piezoelectric crystals that are located in the pineal gland. These crystals, when they are stimulated, right, in the gland, when they're stimulated by movement, breath, spinal flexion, generate biophotons, light. I think this is why, again, when you talk to yoga practitioners, the third eye is so important. There's a lot of movement, whether it's a yoga practice, a breathing practice, an asana, which is a physical yoga practice, a breathing practice, pranayama. That's a breath practice within yoga. It starts to create what people often describe as opening your third eye. When it generates biophotons, this is creating coherent light. This is the same biophotonic light that Fitz Albert Pop documented as the primary means of cellular communication in living organisms. Okay, so when you're looking at why you would tend to your physical body through yoga, through qigong, through any type of movement through the spine is, I always say, movement through the spine is imperative to help, again, the communication within the body. But I always find it interesting is that people often start their spiritual journey through a physical practice first, whether that's working out like lifting weights, Pilates, yoga, again, all sorts of different movement practices. But I often find first they find the movement and they start to realize that it changes the way that their brain is. It changes the way that they feel. It changes what they're attracting into their life. And this is why. So the more freely that cerebral spinal fluid can flow through that spinal canal, the more organized and coherent those biophoton and the communication throughout the entire nervous system becomes. So then what restricts cerebral spinal fluid? Bound fascial tension, stored stress patterns in the tissues. So this creates the incomplete survival response that holds the body's collagen matrix together. So that's when people are starting to move through things, what they're doing is that communication got stopped. It's like getting a scratch in a CD. Still plays the song, right? Your life still goes on, but the song sounds different in that area. So that means when you start to release this bound tension that's in your spine and in the surrounding fascia, it's not just structural or neurological work. It's actually photonic work. It's light work. Light work. It's restoring the coherence actually to your body's light-based communication system. So to me, it is the most literal in like a biophysical sense, bringing light back into a system that has been partially clouded. It has, when you start to move, when you start to open up the communication within the spine, when you start to change the tension patterns, you start to change the way that the biophotons, the light of your body, respond. And before we kind of like dip out of this segment, because I want to talk about something else, I want to name a little bit of this cross-cultural confirmation, because part of the aim, even in doing and offering You Are the Medicine membership, I talk about this in the different parts of this that I educate and teach on where these roots come from. So I'm not naming TCM or a traditional Chinese medicine meridian pattern or movement or anything like that without giving credit to this is a traditional Chinese medicine pattern. Or we're not talking about breath work without naming it what it is, pranayama. Okay, so I want to make sure that we're bringing some of those things in as well, because in yoga, the central energy channel of the body is Sushumna Nadi. So this is the running, like it runs from basically the base of your spine up to the crown of your head. And this is the channel through which prana or life force flows. So when the body is in its most coherent state, it flows easily. The chakras have a balanced movement, again, along that central channel. There are 7 major chakras. There's a ton of other chakras throughout the body, but the ones that most people know, like root chakra, sacral chakra, things like that. But also, TCM talks about it in a very similar fashion. So TCM, the Dumai, the governing vessel, runs up the spine as the primary yang channel, governing the yang energy and function of the entire body. In the kind of Western esoteric tradition, the spine is the axis mundi, the world axis, the central pole around which all energy organizes itself. So every tradition that has ever worked with the body as an energetic system named the spine as this primary channel. Different cultures, different centuries, different vocabularies, but it's always the same observation. And what we're seeing is quantum biology is confirming what they were pointing at. The spine is where the field meets the body, which is why I think saw spinal energetics online and was like, this tracks, this makes sense. So let's dive into a couple of things. I want to talk about the polyvagal theory and the nervous system, because again, this is another piece, is understanding that this is another piece that your spine is the channel and where the field and the body are meeting because of its piezoelectric properties, its energetic properties. And again, the field, everybody has a field around their body. So I always say it's almost like the field around your body lands and is perceived by the physical, and then it's communicated to the brain. And there's been a little bit of discussion around the polyvagal theory and disproving the polyvagal theory, but I still think there's a lot of really good attributes to it. So if you aren't familiar with it, I'm going to kind of go over a few things that I think are still really pertinent and still really valuable. I think there's a lot of value, even if we find something no longer applies. There's still a lot of wisdom to be there sometimes that's underlying it. So in the 1990s, a neuroscience named Stephen Porges introduced something called the polyvagal theory. And it kind of changed how we actually thought about our relationship between the body, the nervous system, and healing in general. So before the polyvagal theory, the autonomic nervous system was understood as as binary, okay? Sympathetic, meaning fight or flight, activation, mobilization, and then the opposite of that would be the parasympathetic, meaning more just rest and digest, relax, recovery, okay? It was on or off, that's it. And so What he proposed was something that was far more nuanced, and this is something that I still believed to. I think there's some truth to this, is that I think clinically this is a little bit more useful. He actually showed that the autonomic nervous system is more of a hierarchical system. It's organized according to evolutionary age and 3 distinct states. So each of those states has its own neural pathway, most of them running through and along the spine. Okay. I want to walk you through these states because I think understanding them helps a little bit more of the fundamentals and understanding of what spinal energetics is doing. The most ancient state is dorsal vagal. This is the unmethylated vagal pathway. So this pathway we share with most ancient vertebrate ancestors. Okay, this includes reptiles. And it includes that immobilization response, that freeze, the collapse, the shutdown, dissociation. In this state, the body is really conserving metabolic resources by basically being like, I'm checking out and going offline. So this is low energy, low motivation, wanting to disappear. The nervous systems, I would say this is the most extreme response. And the response is inescapable and overwhelming threat. I don't know what to do. I don't see any way out. Just shut down. The second state is more of a sympathetic nervous state. This is more mobilization, so fight, flight, elevated heart rate, elevated cortisol, hypervigilance, activation, like the inability to settle or sit down. This served us really beautifully when the threat was physical. The solution was, I need to get out of here. Like, how do I get out? In modern life, where the threat is relational, financial, existential rather than physical, this is where a lot of people talk about, kind of see those memes or those things where it's like, I'm trying to train my body to know an email from my boss is not the same thing as a tiger type of thing. This is what we're talking about. Okay, the system is activated, but it actually never completes the cycle. It never finishes. So like if you were running from the tiger, you would outrun the tiger and you'd be like, whew, okay. But because the email, it's something that you can think about and focus on, and then you might go in the next day and get another email, and you never really feel like the full come down from that because you're still constantly, usually by the time those things are showing up, there's this constant stimulation of that. It's like you can't really complete the cycle. The third state, and I think this is probably the most evolutionary recent, is the ventral vagal. So this is the myelinated vagal pathway. And that developed more as the emergence of mammals. Okay, so this is more of that social engagement system. This is feeling safe with somebody, feeling connective, creativity, play, co-regulation. This happens a lot with moms and babies. And it's really like the capacity to be with other people and be relaxed and be present and open. And this is a state when genuine healing occurs. So not the dorsal vagals collapse, not the sympathetic mobilization. The ventral vagals regulate connected and present aliveness, okay? I would say this is just, I kind of look at this a little bit differently in the sense that I almost describe it as a dimmer. So the parasympathetic and sympathetic are dimmers. Again, we love a good metaphor. This helps people understand. There are going to be different extremes as to which your body is using each system, the parasympathetic or the sympathetic, in different states. And we have seen over and over and over again that in order for the body to make shifts and really change, you see people that are in stressful situations that are doing all the things right, but they can't lose any weight. They are not under eating, but eating in a calorie deficit. They're weight training, they're doing some cardio, they're doing all the things right, they're taking all of the measurements, but the weight just won't move and hormones are checked, everything's fine. All that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden you alleviate a job or you alleviate a toxic relationship or something like that, and the weight drops off. A lot of that is because, again, the body needs to feel safe in order to make some of these huge changes. So it will do things like hold on to weight or hold on to certain patterns and stuff like that in the system because that creates a sense of safety, or it knows familiarity. The nervous system loves the devil it knows, not the devil it doesn't. So it will continue these patterns of familiarity over something that's new or novel. That being said, do I know if polyvagal is 100%? No, but I thought it was important to understand that there are kind of these three evolutionary parts of who we are. And I think a lot of that feels very true for me. So again, just be mindful of what feels true for you. People who are, have used and implemented a lot of polyvagal theory in their practices are still very diehard. So sometimes we need some nuance and things like that, but I would describe it a little bit more like the dimmer, is that you need to be able to move the dimmers up and down. When the dimmer becomes on all the time, that's when we have a lot of like adrenal fatigue, the immune system starts to crash, different things like that. So the response needs to be able to respond appropriately and come back down, respond appropriately and come back down. It doesn't always need to go fly all the way up to 100. But here's kind of where the spine actually becomes a little bit more critical when we're talking about this, is that most of the sensory information that tells your autonomic nervous system which state it should be in, that information that informs that moment-to-moment kind of assessment of safety or threat comes from your body's tissues, your fascia, your muscles, your connective tissues. And that information is transmitted to the brain via the spinal afferents, nerve fibers that enter the spinal cord from the body's tissues and travel up the brainstem. So the spine is literally the primary highway through which the body's safety assessment is conducted and communicated to the brain. So every piece of somatic information, every pattern of tension, every residue of incomplete survival response, every breath that was held, every braced muscle, every bound fascial restriction, your tight shoulders, your tight back, whatever, it's generating this input that actually travels up the spine and informs the nervous system's state from moment to moment. That means when you're working with the spine, you're working with the fascia and the somatic tissue at and around the spinal column. So you're essentially working directly with the input stream that determines which state your nervous system is in, when you work with the spine. So this is not indirectly and not metaphorically. You're directly working with the spine. So again, we talked about the field. The field communicates and lands in your body. The central column of your spine then travels that up to your brain, and your brain makes meaning of it, does something with it, tells the body, what's our next response? What do we need to do? So this is kind of the other piece too, is then, where does trauma live? Like, how do I get these like stressful, traumatic responses that I can't get out of in my system? I love the work of Peter Levine, and he actually spent decades studying the neuroscience of trauma and developed this somatic experiencing. It's really this therapeutic approach based on his observation that traumatic stress is not primarily a psychological phenomenon. It's a somatic one. Again, body and mind, they're connected. When a stress or a threat response is activated, the body mobilizes for fight, flight, freeze. It does something. And the response cycle is not allowed to complete when there's trauma. So the survival energy that mobilized doesn't ever get to dissipate. It shoots off and then is like, here's the ceiling. So it becomes stored, and it's in the body's tissues, in the fascia, in the muscles, in the connective tissue surrounding the spine. Bessel van der Kolk documented this extensively in The Body Keeps the Score. Trauma is not this primary, just cognitive narrative that's happening. It's this somatic pattern. It's encoded in the body's tissues and alters the muscle tone, fascial restriction, and knots in the muscles, dysregulated breathing patterns. When you feel like you can't take a deep breath, for those people who experience panic or anxiety attacks and they can only breathe into their clavicles, right? These are signals through that collagen bioelectric matrix. So you can't really think your way out of this somatic imprint. It has to be met where it lives. And it lives most of the time in the spine and the surrounding fascial network. This is exactly why spinal energetics really works, is that it's not just incorporating, again, the just looking at manipulating the physical. It's not a massage. It's not an alignment. It's understanding the patterns through which the body is communicating and interpreting from the field. So if you only meet it at the physical layer, you're missing where it might be originating, and that tension pattern might lie in your field that's then collapsing. Again, we talk about the collapse. Go ahead and check out that episode again on the quantum biology, a few episodes back, understanding it to the body. So then what's actually happening when the body moves? Those spontaneous movements is because, and I think this is the piece that confuses most people who are new to somatic therapy or spinal energetics. But also when you understand, it's like the most extraordinary evidence of the body's innate intelligence and wisdom and healing system. Animals in the wild have done this after surviving a predator, after the chase, after the freeze, after the escape. Humans don't do this anymore. They shake. They tremble, right? Sometimes they let out a roar. And sometimes this is pretty violent for several minutes. And then they walk away and they go back to grazing, they go back to doing whatever they're doing. And like I said before, when you watch children express emotions, children under 4, 5, they don't have any awareness of what's socially appropriate to express themselves. Every emotion typically has a body movement to it. When they cry, they hang their head, they shrug their shoulders, and maybe throw themselves on the floor. When they're happy, though, they jump up and down, they throw their arms up, they get excited, right? And you see it with their whole body. And what happens is we're conditioned to not show those emotions. We're conditioned to show only certain ones, only in certain, environments, only to a certain threshold. And so what happens is that surge that we talked about of experience from the nervous system hits that ceiling in the body. It has nowhere to go. And so we can hold ourselves back from experiencing joy. We hold ourselves back from experiencing pain or pleasure. We hold ourselves back from, doing things that would require a lot of bravery because we're so scared, and our nervous system is like, see this loop that's still running feels very familiar. Let's just do this. This already worked. It already got us out of when we felt like that again. But some of these experiences are happening before you're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. So these patterns, I always say, really adults are just small children in big bodies. If you don't actually do the work to work through what's been learned and stored into your body, you're going to live out a life that is not yours. That is just the way in which you learned to survive when you were younger. And I don't mean that and you had to have a traumatic life. I don't mean that at all. I mean, you interpreted your parents' behavior, your environment's behavior, and needed to get your needs met. So what did you do? Modified your behavior in order to get your needs met. The more that you do a lot of this work, the less you'll need to modify, because you start to feel safe to be authentically who you are because you release these patterns of tension in the nervous system. And Peter Levine actually spent years studying this and really concluded that, again, when we talk about the movement, looked at the shaking, the trembling as really the nervous system completing this cycle. That was the mobilization of energy, flooding the body's systems. That's the cortisol, the adrenaline, the motor programs that are running and fighting were discharged through the trembling. And because the discharge happened, the cycle completed and the animal's nervous system returned to this baseline state. It didn't develop this PTSD where it was scared to go, do these things. That it carried this event and store this pattern. It completed done. Humans are really the only animals that really suppress this discharge. And I would say that because of that it's really because we have frontal lobes. Yay us. Because we have social conditioning, again, that says making sounds, shaking, all that is not acceptable because we have to hold it all together. We have to look a certain way. We have to carry this. Don't tell anybody, don't share it. I was listening to the radio this morning and they were talking about how she went to this, I live in Las Vegas, so I think she went to the Vegas Golden Knights hockey game. And she got invited to a suite by her friend, and the friend came up and was like, thank you so much for not asking me how much I paid for this suite. And she was like, oh, I didn't even think about it. And they kind of went on to talk about how she's like, I would never ask anybody how much, I can't believe we wouldn't talk about this. And I'm like, that's the problem. Why is that a big deal? Why are we offended by every little thing? Why are we upset when somebody asks us how much something is? Because we're making meaning of it. We're making meaning that you're going to judge me when I tell you the number. That may not be. They might just be curious because maybe they want to rent it. They want to get a ballpark. You don't know the intention of any question. Like the way that we respond is because of how we have been conditioned, because of what we've had to carry. And this goes on for years, for decades. Sometimes this goes on for people's entire lives. So spinal energetics really creates the conditions to actually be able to discharge those loops, those patterns, so they can finally like complete themselves. So the light or energetic input at the spine and surrounding field communicates safety to the nervous system. Of course, it's important. The tone of the own practitioner's nervous system, that influences the person. Again, they want to make sure that they're coherent, that they're paying attention, all of those things, because it's very, this creates this co-regulatory space in which the client's nervous system can, sometimes for the first time ever in their life, let their guard down. And it may have been maintaining this like response, this incomplete response for so long. So when the body does this, when it finally finds safety, a lot of times the body will move. So the undulation of the spine is the collagen matrix releasing the bound piezoelectric tension and reorganizing the bioelectric patterns. So the trembling, that's the motor discharge of incomplete survival responses, finally completing their cycle. The sounds are that vagus nerve, which regulates the larynx and the muscles of the middle ear as part of that social engagement system. It's like starting to come online as a ventral vagal state activates, right? That's that safe state that they talk about in polyvagal theory, where it's safe to have the tears that are coming from this parasympathetic system releasing. Years, decades of this held activation. This is not performance. And it's interesting when people say that, oh, this is acting. I was like, fuck, wish. You can't pay people to act. You'd have to pay them a lot of money to act this well. And I have witnessed it so many times. A lot of times there's no communication. Some practitioners don't speak the whole session. None of it really even requires a belief in a particular framework or practice for it to even happen. This is really the body's own intelligence doing what it's always known how to do if the right conditions and if there's enough safety for them to be able to do it. And the practitioner's role in creating these conditions is, I think, significant. I think that's why you have people take advantage of that power play, and you have people who are genuinely wonderful humans, is that understanding how much power you actually do hold as a practitioner to uphold that sense of safety for them. So let's bring this more into the practical, because the science has direct implications for how you explain your work, right? If you're a practitioner, how you set expectations with clients, how you support the entire healing process beyond the session, like table or the group session. And this also dictates how you invest in your own development as a practitioner. We'll kind of go through a lot of them, but I want to first go into how to explain this to a skeptical client. So when you have all of these different elements, how do you explain this to somebody who's like, I don't really know what this is? You can say something like your spine is the central axis of your body's bioelectric communication network. So all of the fascia and the tissues that are surrounding it is actually part of this continuous body-wide matrix. Piezoelectric collagen, which is just, again, collagen creates a little bit of an electrical current when it's rubbed together, twisting, moving, things like that every time. So it stores patterns of tension from incomplete stress and survival responses. So this can go back for decades or years. And again, you can use some references like I talked about earlier in this episode, but these stored patterns are constantly informing your nervous system when it's safe to fully relax, when it's safe to be present. And a lot of times that's without your informed consent, because it's a pattern that your nervous system has already learned. So spinal energetics works with that network that communicates through intelligent touch and energetic input to create conditions in which the stored pattern can finally complete itself, right? And I just, again, use the metaphor of a CD. I hope your clients are maybe old enough to know what a CD is. And I just tell them, like, you might feel movement, sound, emotional release. I use the child expression. A lot of people can identify with that. That's very normal. And it's very intelligent. And so when you do this work and the body feels safe, it'll often revert back to those states of authenticity. We're just creating the right conditions for it. A lot of my clients will come to me and we'll do a spinal energetic session. I had one client for a while. After every single session, she was chronically constipated. And after every single session, she could go to the bathroom. I've had several people that start their periods who they haven't had it in years, and not because they're in menopause, but because of hormone dysregulation, different signals coming into the body. Within 24 hours, they start their period. That happens all the time. Not because I'm making their body do anything, but because when your body becomes regulated, all these reproductive systems, things like that, start to come back online because the body is safe, so it can do these things again. So this is really not like spiritual claims. This is understanding that this is a clinical description, somatic, trauma discharge of piezoelectric, bioelectricity. This is understanding polyvagal theory, and it's accurate. It's understood, and it's worked for long periods of time. And I think this is also why structure work alone does not hold. As somebody shared this openly on many other episodes, but I have a double curve in my spine. So I have scoliosis times 2, and they're almost perfectly balanced. They are both at about, I think, 29.2 degrees. I think one is 0.2 and the other one's like 0.6. They're almost completely balanced. And I notice I've gone to a chiropractor for all my entire life, basically. And that pattern always wants to revert. I've done certain patterns and things like that. I've noticed the biggest change is when I do somatic therapies like spinal energetics and some other things like that. Because what's happening is the tension is still being communicated from the brain. Your bones are just being held in this sac of muscles, tendons, ligaments, collagen. The bones, as we know from braces and from casts, change shape according to what's creating pressure. So when I release the pressure and the tension patterns that are being held, any type of achiness or anything like that often alleviates itself really, really quickly for me. What I find interesting is I've listened to a lot of episodes that with practitioners like Dr. Sarah Jane and other people in that realm. And one of the most common observations, I would say, from like practitioners who come from like I need alignment or again that chiropractic world, is that structural adjustments, however perfect, often require repeated application. And they come in, again, like me, with the same pattern. And I don't think that's because there's failure to adjustment. It's the nervous system recreating a familiar pattern. It's that autonomic nervous system that was never really addressed. It's operating from this stored signal that's transmuted through the fascial network that keeps gathering the same muscle tone, the same postural compensation, the same fascial restriction pulls back to that position. It's associated that position with its default state, that threat state. So until the nervous system starts to reorganize, until the stored somatic patterns discharge, and the polyvagal state shifts towards that more regulated state, the structure will keep returning. Spinal energetics, I think, is unique in that it addresses both simultaneously, the somatic pattern and the nervous system state that's recreating it. I think this is why results often hold in ways that structural work doesn't alone. And again, addresses things that I don't think a lot of just addressing the physical can do. I think the third thing is that this is a pretty non-linear journey. The nervous system is not really linear. It doesn't proceed in a straight line from dysfunction. Again, it's not on and off. It spirals, it surfaces, it completes, it integrates, it surfaces again, but differently, often at like deeper levels. So really, like, clients need to be prepared for that, is that just because you've done 1 or 2 sessions, I always say you're just trying something. You're not actually looking for resolution. I think things can resolve in 1 or 2 sessions. Yes, I think 2 things can be true. Most of the time when clients book 1 or 2 sessions and then they fall off, they just wanted to try something. But like anything else, they wanted something that was a quick fix. They're also the person that's like, I'm going to grab the diet pill. I'm going to grab, the quick meal, the protein bar, things like that, rather than cooking myself a nourishing meal, or rather than committing to workouts, or, things like that. And so I think when you're committed to the work, you start to invest in it because you're like, I want to see a change in my life. I want to see a change in the state of my system, not just try something to see how it feels. And I think that's different. And I find I integrate a lot of homeopathic approaches even into somatic work that I do with my clients, because I do both. And so in kind of the homeopathic philosophy, so Herring's law of cure, healing moves from the inside out and from what is more vital to the less vital organs, from top down and in reverse order of the original appearance of the symptoms. So the body heals in that order that serves the whole system. What emerges at a session is what it's ready to complete. So people will come in, they're like, well, nothing, like, I really wanted to work on this. And I'm like, well, your body doesn't feel safe enough for that. We'll get there. And the intention is, I always ask like people's intention, and those types of things, but it's not, your intention is not a checklist. It's, what am I moving towards? That doesn't mean that that's the destination. I'm moving in that direction. Intention is different, moving in that direction. So you really need to trust the sequence. You need to trust your body. Your clients' bodies are not going backwards if another pattern shows up. They're just actually going deeper. Sometimes it'll be deeper layers, different patterns, stuff like that. And I think the final thing is, as a practitioner, investing in your own spine, but also investing in your own development as not just a practitioner, but also a business owner. Educate yourself. Don't take one training and that's the end all be all. Learn about some of these nuances within your framework that you're using, whether it's spinal energetics or something else. And if you're looking to make this your business, or this is your primary driver of your business or clients or things like that, learning how to best advertise. How do you speak to your people? What shows up for you that resists certain things? Understanding that your business is a mirror also to what is going on in your own system. You will shy away from things that make you feel uncomfortable. And there's really no shortcut here. You cannot take a client's nervous system somewhere you have not been. And I think that's a lot of times the reason why sometimes people are going through something really deep. And I think it was honestly looking back now, it's one of the best things for me and for my business. I experienced a lot of things in my life before I was 25 years old that most people do not experience until after they're 50. And in doing so, I was able to meet a broader spectrum of people where they were at because I had been there. I had been there very young. So if you're not investing in yourself, if you're not investing in your own regulation, if you're not investing in changing the patterns of your nervous system and integrating afterwards, like, you're doing that increases your capacity to hold for your clients, because you've navigated some of these things for yourself. So your own healing is not really separate from your clinical practice. It's actually the foundation of your practice and of your business. And here's what I want you to leave with, okay, today when you hop off this episode, that your spine is not just infrastructure. It's not just the scaffolding of your body, so to speak, that hangs out while real biology is actually taking place. Your spine is this living, piezoelectric, bioelectric, biophotonic central channel. Is the primary access through which your nervous system accesses safety, it organizes experience, and distributes that organization to every system in your body. Okay? This is the structure which your entire fascial communication network is arranged. This is the central antenna through which your entire field meets your body. Like, when it's bound by stored stress and these incomplete survival responses, when the piezoelectric collagen matrix is holding patterns from experiences that were too much, too soon, too fast, didn't have enough support, your whole system compensates. your nervous system stays stuck in this sympathetic activation, this dorsal vagal shutdown, and the biophotonic communication becomes less coherent. Okay? The body cannot fully settle into that ventral vagal state where it feels safe to play, to create, things like that, if it doesn't feel safe to do so. When it's free, those stored patterns that have been allowed to discharge, where that fascial network has been able to actually like reorganize, when the nervous system has finally climbed out of shutdown or fight or flight, you feel regulated and you're socially so much more engaged. That is kind of that evolutionary pinnacle. The whole system reorganizes with it. My system right now is a completely different system than from 10 years ago. Completely different. And it's not because I'm older and wiser, although I am both of those things. It's that the way that I respond to the world is day and night difference. And this is really what spinal energetics does. This is what doing work that incorporates mind, body, and spirit does. Again, that's not a spiritual claim. That's literally a biophysical description of exactly what polyvagal neuroscience and quantum biology say should happen and do happen. When the body's primary electromagnetic conductor is working freely, it becomes so much more coherent. Every tradition has looked at the spine as sacred. They just didn't have the language of that piezoelectricity or the polyvagal theory or understanding how or why that happened. They were able to explain, this is what happens, this is the pattern that I see, but not some of the quote unquote science behind it, right? The biochemistry of it. So if you're a practitioner doing this work, own it. You are working on one of the most sophisticated intersections of neuroscience, biophysics, and somatic medicine available right now. Okay? The skeptics are not ahead of you. The science is just catching up to what you already know. And if you're someone who's received sessions and felt something you could not feel fully explain, it was real. Your body was completing something that was very important and it knows exactly what to do next. So if you really enjoyed this episode, if you really enjoyed learning some of these things, I would love if you send this episode to a friend, a colleague, someone that was like, oh my gosh, I love kind of learning all these things. This podcast is designed to be both educational and inspirational. So if you loved it, please share it. If you're still here listening, please make sure that you hit the subscribe button. That always helps us. And if you haven't already, come find me on social media, say hi. I would love to chat. But until next time, my friends, cheers.